Hello, my name is Brianna Acosta, and I'm going to be doing my presentation on Wes Anderson. So, to start off, just a short biography of Wes. So, he was born in Houston, Texas on May 1st, 1969, and he was born the middle child of three sons whose parents divorced when Anderson was 8. Anderson's brother, Eric Chase Anderson, is a writer and artist whose paintings and designs have appeared in several of Anderson's films, such as The Royal Tenenbaums. Um, Wes Anderson graduated from St. James Preparatory High School and later attended the University of Texas in Austin. Growing up, Anderson wanted to be an architect, then a writer, but ended up graduating college with a degree in philosophy. An interesting thing about Anderson is that he tends to draw from his past. So, the fact that his parents were divorced when he was young often presents itself in many of Anderson's themes, and even the high school that Anderson went to is where his film Rushmore is filmed. So, a little bit about Anderson's career. Anderson grew up making Super 8 films on his dad's camera, and in college, he met Owen Wilson, whom he made his first short film with, titled Bottle Rocket. Bottle Rocket ended up screening at Sundance in 1994, where it caught the attention of a producer that led him um, turning his short film into a feature film with the same title. From there, Anderson has gone on to collaborate with Owen Wilson on many films and has written, produced, and directed many of his own. So, to get into Anderson's style, um, Anderson pays extreme attention to detail. Anderson is one of the most involved and hands-on auteurs of our time. He has a very distinct style and can be recognized in each of his films. And he also has a certain aesthetic that lets you know you're watching a Wes Anderson film. Um, his attention to detail especially comes in the forms of production design, costume, sets, and color. And his films can be linked with visual and thematic motifs that are signature to his directing style. His movies tend to have a storybook feeling to them. Anderson tends to focus on art direction, and the unique production designs of his film give off a sense that you're watching stories played out in a dollhouse or a storybook. And his great attention to detail suggests his characters are living in an entirely different world, even though they're based in reality. His movies have a chapter like structure. His movies also take on a childlike perspective. Anderson seemingly tells his stories from his perspective when he was 11 or 12 years old. His movies also tend to have reoccurring actors such as Owen Wilson, Luke Wilson, Bill Murray, and many others that you can see on this slide. So, to get into his production design, to start off with his sets, they often use flats or miniature designs to create locations and entire worlds. As you can see in one of these photos, this is a miniature design up against a green screen that uses as an establishing shot for the Grand Budapest Hotel. He also does some really cool things with color that I'm going to be talking about a little later, but just as a summary, Anderson tends to use pastel colors and muted browns and yellows throughout his film that are distinctive to his aesthetic. And to him, and throughout his movies, certain colors have certain meanings and create different tones, especially in his costumes. His costumes tend to define his characters, situations, and relationships. And Anderson often associates his characters to a single color that they wear, and when their costumes change, it's usually a change in tone or a change in theme that something has happened. His objects also have great meaning to his characters. So to talk about a little bit about Wes Anderson's cinematography and camera language, so he's definitely known for using wide angle lens shots that are symmetrical and have flat frames, and this sort of adds to the storybook effect of his films. He also uses rectilinear shots, meaning that he uses a lot of geometry and mostly straight lines that you can see in these photos that help with the symmetry of his shots. He also tends to use tracking shots with a lot of movement that show the detail of his worlds that his characters live in, making them seem more theater like, again, adding to the storybook effect. He also likes using slow motion shots and long one take shots that stray away from cutting and use instead strange camera movements like 180-degree pans. So, to talk a little bit about the themes and characters of Anderson's films, one element that makes Anderson's films so distinctive and personal is that he pulls from his past. Anderson creates characters and stories from people that he knows, and he incorporates his past experiences into all of his films. One very prominent theme that he presents in his films is dysfunctional families. Characters within his films often present themselves to be deeply damaged and have unstable family relationships. And although family is a source of conflict within his films that provide entertainment, it also becomes the source of resolution at the end of his films to help teach lessons. Anderson also tends to incorporate children that act like adults and adults that act like children. The child characters in Anderson's film often have a sense of maturity and talk as if they're grown-ups. They're taken seriously in the films, and they're never talked down to by the adults, whereas the adults are often presented in this man-child trope as they cope through problems in childish ways. And he also tends to incorporate a performance within a performance. His films often feature theatrical performances or other artistic performances that give off the same effect as a dream within a dream. The comedy in Anderson's film also doesn't come from one liners or jokes necessarily, but instead it's found in moments when characters are seemingly being completely serious and deliver deadpan lines. And this is what truly gives Anderson's films the quirk that they have. He also tends to incorporate the down spiral of seemingly well put together or successful characters. He actually also has a quote where he says, I guess when I think about it, one of the things I like to dramatize and what is sometimes funny is someone coming unglued. I don't consider myself someone who is making the argument that I suppose these choices, I just think it can be funny. So let's talk about Anderson's themes and distinctive qualities within his film, The Royal Tenenbaums. So first of all, in this shot, we see Anderson's use of tracking shots that have a lot of movement. This film also presents us with a theme of adults that act like children and children that act like adults. When they're kids, the Tenenbaums are well accomplished, they're successful, they're very intelligent, and very mature. But as they grow up, they start to get more dysfunctional. And even Margot and Richie's relationship mirrors that of two teenagers in love. Royal is also presented as a man child, as he teaches his family to find joy in being irresponsible like a kid. In this movie, we see the theme of dysfunctional family with Royal and his kids and the siblings within themselves. We see men falling apart. We also see Anderson's use of symmetry, his attention to costumes, and detailed production design. Um, his costumes tend to define his character. Chaz with his tracksuit. We see Eli, who wears a cowboy suit. Richie, who's a retired professional tennis player, still wears his tennis uniform and head strap, suggesting he still wants to live in the past. And even Margot is dressed with thick eyeliner in a brown dress that is signature to her character. The color palette throughout this movie has toned whites and tans, and also pops of red and greens and pinks that set the tone for the movie. Anderson tends to stray from cuts. He uses zoom outs and zoom ins, along with tracking shots and weird pans. He also in this movie he uses voiceover and text on screen, along with inserted images and letters to give exposition that add to his storybook effect. So now to talk about the Grand Budapest Hotel. In this film, we see many of the reoccurring themes that Anderson presents in his other films, such as the unraveling of a seemingly put together man as things slowly go downhill for Mr. Gustav, who is very presentable at the beginning of the film. This film also thrives on Anderson's deadpan humor, as well as his really long tracking shots and his symmetrical frames. But the most notable of Wes Anderson elements in this film have to be the production design, costumes, and colors. The purples of Mr. Gustav's concierge suit and the blacks of Dimitri and his gang's costumes really add to who they are as people. Anderson also uses different color palettes to show different points in time, giving this movie a chapter story like film that he presents in his other movies as well. Of all the cultural impacts Wes Anderson has had on film, I think the biggest one has to be his use of color and color theory that have been very influential. In films, we usually see bright and saturated colors to enforce lighter and happier tones, whereas dark and desaturated colors are often used for dramatic effects. But Anderson, on the other hand, often does the exact opposite or uses a combination to mix these things and blur the lines between color theory. The Grand Budapest Hotel is a great example of how skilled Anderson is at using color to help tell his stories. Anderson often uses colors as motifs and gravitates to primary colors like reds and yellows that, when saturated, really pop. The aesthetic that Anderson has used is very distinctive and very influential. This aesthetic actually prompted a viral social media movement and hashtag that showcased different photos that had a Wes Anderson aesthetic. And this hashtag, titled Accidentally Wes Anderson, then led to an entire book of Wes Anderson style photos being published in 2020 with the same title, Accidentally Wes Anderson, which goes to show how distinctive of an auteur Wes Anderson really is. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. I hope you liked it.